Gordon Weaver made an observation some time back that said this: we keep in science getting a more and more sophisticated view of our essential ignorance. It's an observation that is quite appropriate to our next speaker. Corliss, if there's such a thing as reincarnation, is Charles Fort back with us again. What Charles did in the first third of this century by going to the scientific literature and calling from it anomalies that the scientific community had problems dealing with, Mr. Corliss has done so at the last third of this millennium. Through his Sourcebook Project imprint, he has compiled a wealth of fascinating, provocative, and mind-expanding information that presents real problems to those people who think that the universe is nice and neatly wrapped up and explained in a box with Christmas wrap. Those people who say that the paranormal doesn't exist have problems with Mr. Corliss's work because he's pulled it from their own regiment, from their own disciplines. He's brought along his books. If you haven't had a chance to go up to the boardroom during the previous brief break, after this evening's program, he and his wife will be back in the bookroom until about 7 o'clock to retail and sign this incredible treasure trove of books that he has compiled and put together. If you're a serious, dedicated Fortean, his books are indispensable. If you have an interested niche in the wide, broad range of Forteana, look for Mr. Corliss's works. He's categorized them, and his work is just awesome. From his plethora of Fortean investigations and documentation, today he's selected just one narrow little slice of that incredible work, which he's going to present this afternoon right now. Please welcome Bill Corliss to the lectern. His talk is Anomalies, Biological Anomalies of Birthkeeping. Bill Corliss, come on.
I'm glad somebody mentioned logical positivism because being educated as a physicist, I like logical positivism. However, I have a strong Fortean inclination, as you will see when I get to the subject of birds.
When I started preparing this talk to Forteans about birds, I thought I would go back into Charles Fort's collected books, 4 volumes, and try and find out what he wrote about birds. I went to the index and all I could find was something birds, falls. That's all. I thought to myself, well, we have bird falls today. For example, the latest one I have in my collection happened in 1991 out in Utah, when thousands of eared grebes, it's a small water bird, fell out of the sky out of a little town in Utah. Hundreds of them died. The townspeople gathered up the rest of them and took to a nearby lake where they finally recovered and took off. They can't take off from land, by the way. They're kind of like balloons. They have very weak feet. They have to paddle along the surface of the water for a long ways before they can get airborne. Well, that's a very important bird fall of recent years. There was another one in England where gray-legged geese fell out of the sky. And they, okay. Okay, how's that? Yeah. How's that? Okay. Okay, well, I was talking about a flock of gray-legged geese that fell out of the sky in Britain. They had been torn up by a storm. Their insides were all ruptured and everything. So bird falls are not that uncommon. I couldn't see how Charles Fort, however, could have missed the flat they had of luminous birds around 1907 and 1908. So diligently looking through his books, I finally found it. How can birds be luminous? Well, it has a very prosaic explanation. Most of the luminous birds that have been found are owls, and they nest in cavities in the trees that have rotten wood, and they have luminous fungi on the cavities. And they pick up this fungi and they fly at night and they become luminous, almost like a UFO or a nocturnal light. Okay, now as Larry mentioned, I've been putting together a collection of books on scientific anomalies. This is the latest one. This is a 16th volume of the series. The second one on mammals. There are 3 in humans, and then there are other books on geophysics and geology and astronomy. The book I'm working on now, obviously, is birds, and I'm about halfway done. I have about 300 pages done. It's going to be a real thick book in this series, probably about 600 or 700 pages long. You wouldn't think there would be that many anomalies on birds, but there certainly are. And we'll get to a few of them here today. I won't be able to go through all of them, but we'll do the best we can. Before I get into the drawings I brought along, which will appear in the book, I thought I'd mention a few things for which I do not have drawings. I'm sure the subject of thunderbirds will be brought up. In fact, Larry just mentioned it to me. I don't have much on thunderbirds. I've read through the scientific literature, and it's practically devoid of anything you can associate with thunderbirds. However, there are reports of giant storks and giant penguins, of all things. So we'll get into that in the book later on. I haven't written that chapter yet. I do also want to mention something on honey guides. I'm going to present an outline of the whole book in a minute, but honey guides are an important subject for people who are interested in birds and 14 phenomena. Honey guides are sort of nondescript birds in Africa. They don't like honey, as the name might suggest, but they do like the grubs, the larvae in the bee colonies, and they also like to eat the beeswax. And they're the only birds in the bird kingdom that can digest beeswax. Very strange. Well, anyway, honey guides are, as I say, they're very small, nondescript birds, and they can't get at these honey loads that are in trees and in rock crevices and everything. So they enlist the services of humans and red-tails, which are honey badgers, and even baboons to help them out. And the thing that I think is sort of fortunate about this whole thing is that these honey guides have developed a system of communication with humans and with these other animals by means of signals by voice and by how they fly and how high they sit up in the tree. They lead people and baboons and the rat-tails to these hives of wild bees. And of course the humans can tear the trees apart and everything and get the honey out. And the honey guys hang around until the humans or rat-tails are finished with the honey, and then they eat the beeswax. Very interesting case of birds helping out people and vice versa. Now I'm going to mention honey guys again because they are a very strange bird. They're one of the brood parasites. That is, they lay their eggs in the nests of other birds and the other birds raise them. And I'm going to be saying a lot about brood parasites because there are a lot of anomalies there.
I'm sure I will never get to the end of my talk, so I'm going to mention a couple of things I had at the very end. One of the chapters I'm working on, well, the chapter I'm working on now, as a matter of fact, is called Talents and Faculties. One faculty that the birds have, which is not really understood very well at all, is their ability to detect infrasound. Now, infrasound is sound that humans cannot hear. It's below about 40 cycles per second. Unless somebody's going by with a boom box and you can feel the pressure waves, you can't detect infrasound at all. But some birds can. And the question is, why would birds want to detect infrasound? Well, it turns out that distant storms, earthquakes, a lot of natural phenomena generate sounds that we cannot hear. They're lower frequency response, say 20 cycles per second, 10 cycles per second, and so on. And birds, at least a few of them, have developed a sensor that'll pick up infrasound, even as low as maybe one cycle every, one pulse of sound every 20 seconds or so. Something like 0.02 or something like that hertz.
So pigeons especially have this capability, and they have an organ on their legs in all places that will pick up infrasound. Very strange, and you wonder how it evolved. Another faculty that birds have, which I think is kind of interesting, is, well, actually, most birds don't have it, and that is the sense of smell. But some birds have an exceptional sense of smell. And the bird I'm thinking of in this case is the turkey vulture, which I'm sure if you were a bird watcher, you've seen many sailing around the skies. There's an interesting 14-type story connected with turkey vultures. They find their food, unlike all the other vultures, by a sense of smell. And Of course, the vulgar vultures around, they're always keeping their eye on the turkey vultures to see if they found anything by sense of smell. And they can sail over wooded areas and everything and find carcasses that are down in under the trees and everything. Well, the story, which is most amusing to me at least, is that humans have put turkey vultures to work. As you know, this country is covered with natural gas lines. And it's very hard to define where leaks are in natural gas lines. Some of them may be hundreds of miles long, you know. So what they do is, they insert a chemical at one of the pumping stations, which smells like decaying flesh. And then they watch for the turkey vultures to assemble. And then they find where the leak is. Another thing I want to mention before I get into the illustrations is the talent birds have for singing. Birds don't have vocal cords like humans do. Instead, they have an organ called a syrinx, S-Y-R-I-N-X. Very good for parlor games if you don't know it. This syrinx is a double-barreled organ, and birds can sing 2 songs at the same time, which is very interesting. They can also, there's one recorded instance of a bird being able to produce 4 different notes that are unrelated harmonically at the same time. So, and some birds do sing 2 songs at once at the same time, so it's interesting development. I don't know whether I would call it anomalous or forging or what, but it's there. Let's see. Okay, I think we're ready for the first illustration now.
And now you will have to speak up, because that's being loud.
Okay, is that all right?
We got lights now.
Okay, can we get the lights so we can see what we have here? Here's a chapter outline of the bird book. You can just ignore my codes at the left. They don't turn into appearance and morphology. I've already written about 200 pages of this subject and another 100 pages on behavior. And I'm working on the BBT chapter down at the end there, talents and faculties. I already told you I don't have anything on PBU that would interest you in terms of thunderbirds, but we do have the giant storks and giant penguins. And I already mentioned the honey guides, which will be included in chapter BBX, interfaces with other species. Okay, now down at the very bottom there, I've listed the journals which have been of greatest use to me in preparing this volume. We have, first of all, the general science journals, which Charles Fort, of course, did go through, especially Nature and Science. Now, Charles Fort, of course, stopped his research work in the late 20s, I would say, maybe early 30s. And he only got up to a volume about, let's say, 130 for Nature. Nature is now up to 390 volumes. Science is up to 290 volumes. And the same is true for all the other journals, too. Charles Fort did a great job, but there's been a lot that's happened since he did his research at the British Museum. All told, I think I've gone through about 15,000 volumes now of scientific journals, looking for stuff which doesn't fit current scientific theories. I've gone through the complete run of Nature, of course, and Science, and for this particular project on birds, I've gone through those volumes those journals which I've listed under natural history. And then at the very bottom you see the specialized ornithological journals that I've gone through. For example, the Auk, which is an American ornithological journal, runs around about 110 volumes now. And the Ibis, which is a British journal, runs about 130 volumes. So there's a lot of ornithological literature out there, and there are a lot of anomalies in it, believe me. One observation I want to make, besides mentioning that there are other journals from Australia called the Emu, obviously, and one from South Africa called the Ostrich. There must be another several thousand ornithological journals, but I think I've hit the major ones. If you look at all of the scientific journals collectively, and there are over 50,000 different titles, and you assume that maybe each journal has in existence 20 volumes or so on the average, you're talking about 1 million volumes of scientific journals. And I've only gone through, say, 15,000 out of that 1 million. So there's a lot of work to do out there yet. Although I do think I've hit the main journals, especially Nature and Science. They're really tops in terms of getting scientific anomalies. Okay, now we'll get the next slide, please, or next page. Now we get into some illustrations here. Okay. Has anybody seen anything strange about that top bird? Yeah, the beak. This is the only bird out of 9,000 species that has a bill that curves to the right. It always curves to the right. It doesn't curve down like a lot of shorebirds. It doesn't curve up like the avocets. It curves to the right. This is a rye bill. And explaining this kind of asymmetry is very difficult for people who go into genetics and how the body develops. Of course, we're asymmetrical inside because our heart's on one side, and we're not split down the middle, mirror image-wise, like we are externally. So this rye bill is very hard to explain in terms of the bill, but it's interesting how he uses this bill. This is a New Zealand bird, and it walks along the shore and explores around rocks, and it just puts its head down and pokes that curved bill under the rock as it walks around the rock. So it turns out to be a very efficient way of finding food under rocks. Now, a more Fortean case of asymmetry among the birds is called, I don't know if I can pronounce it right, gynandromorphism. And this is a genetic problem where it creates a bird which is female on one side and male on the other. This is not very noticeable in say a starling because the sexes look alike. But if you take a mallard duck, for example, the male is brightly colored, has a green head, very, very colorful, and the female is really drab. So a mallard, which has this condition of gynandromorphism, is a really strange-looking bird. I also might mention something interesting about birds in general. All female birds only have one operative ovary. The other one is non-functional completely, except in a few hawks. Nobody knows why this is the case, but only one side of the female reproduction system works. Now, can everyone see the bottom illustration? Looks like a duck, doesn't it? You can't see the anomaly here, or the Fortean phenomenon here. This is an African finfoot. There are only 3 of them, one in each of the southern continents, Africa, Asia, and India, and South America. The American version of the finfoot is called the sun grebe, and it looks like a sun grebe. It's a water bird, it's swimming around a lot, dives for food. One characteristic of all the finfoots is that they have highly decorative legs. The sun grebe, which is a denizen of Central America and South America, has feet that are striped black and orange, like a tiger, more or less. The African finfoot has pea green legs with yellow lobes. They're picturesque. Why would a bird have such colorful feet when it's in the water all the time and they can't be used as a sexual attractant? Well, anyway, the thing I want to get to about the sun grebe and all of the other 2 finfoots is that they, among all the birds, have pockets under their wings, and they carry their young around in little pockets. And you can even see them when they fly over with the little birds' heads sticking out of the pockets. Very unusual development among the birds. Have the next illustration, please. Okay, now we see 2 birds on top. One of them is quite common around here, and that's the eastern meadowlark. Can you tell which one it is? Right or left?
Right, left.
Yeah, it's left, right. That's correct. But what's the one on the right? Looks almost identical. It's a yellow-throated longclaw. It's an African bird. It looks almost identical to the 2 species of American meadowlarks. Now, the interesting thing is here, we have a case of parallel evolution, because the 2 birds, the American and the African, have similar habitats, and evolution has somehow run in a parallel course here to give almost identical outward appearance. Now, this outward appearance is quite striking because
The backs are just brown, but the breasts are bright yellow with a black V on them. Now, how color evolution ever figured out how to duplicate that particular combination is hard to explain. And down below, we have a similar situation occurring. These two birds look identical, but they're very, very distantly related. The top is a dovekie, which finds its food in the northern ocean, around the Arctic. And the bottom is a Magellanic diving petrel, very distantly related. In fact, the diving petrel is one of the tube-nosed birds that its nostrils are tubular, just like the albatrosses. So here again, we have another case of parallel evolution where the habits and behavior of the birds of different origins have made them look the same. Very interesting evolutionary problem. Next slide, please. Okay. The top bird, I think most people will recognize as a kiwi. That's a bird of New Zealand. The bottom bird is a woodcock, which occurs in America and Eurasia. No, I want to have the top one again too. Okay, well, what's that strange thing in the kiwi? It's made from an X-ray of a kiwi, and that's the size egg they lay. It weighs an egg about 1/3 its own weight. And the kiwi, as some of you may know, is one of the ractites. It's related to the ostrich and the emu and the rhea and the cassowary. And the puzzle here is, why such a small bird? It's only about the size of a chicken. Lay such a big egg. All of the other ractites, the ostrich and emu, are large, and they lay eggs that are comparable, measure with their size. But the kiwi still has this egg problem. And the question is, how did this mismatch ever arise? Was the kiwi once a large bird and shrank and the egg didn't? Nobody has a real good answer why it's so strange. Now, there's another interesting thing about the kiwi. It's the only bird with nostrils at the end of its nose. Maybe you see them there. And it digs for worms and puts its bill on the ground and tries to sniff out the worms. Now, down at the bottom we have the woodcock. And can you all see that? Yeah. This is a male, actually, with its tail feathers projecting like a strutting display, like a turkey does. One strange thing about the woodcock is that the female, when it's young or in danger, will carry its young off by clasping the young between its thighs and flies off to a place of safety and carries them that way. It doesn't have pockets under its wings like the sunbeam does. But the main reason I'm mentioning the kiwi and the woodcock together is that they both run for worms. This is an interesting fact. Humans run for worms too, by the way. And here's how a human will do it. A human will find a sapling in the forest where there's a lot of loamy soil, and we'll take a notched stick, and he will throw it like a fiddle bow across the tree, and it will create vibrations that are propagated down into the ground. And these vibrations, for some reason, bring worms to the surface, quickly split. In fact, somebody called me about this just the other day, saying he was pounding a stake into the ground, and lo and behold, all those worms kept popping out of the ground around him. You can also do it with an automobile battery. You can put one wire into the ground 6 feet away, put the other wire, say with a metal rod, and the current will cause the worms to come to the surface. Nobody's sure why they're going to do this. Some say, well, they think a mole is, the vibrations make them think a mole is coming after them, and they come to the surface to escape. And some say, well, they think the vibrations is due to water, the rain falling on the surface, and the worms like to come up and breed like nightcrawlers do and have a wet evening and so on. But nobody really knows. Well, anyway, these two birds both run for worms. Now, the kiwi, which you saw up at the top, runs for worms by stamping his feet. Another bird in New Caledonia called the kagu, K-A-G-U, does the same thing. But the woodcock, which is now on the screen, actually beats the ground with its wings to cause the worms to come to the surface. I should mention the wood turtles do this too. They don't bite to get their wings out, see, but they do stamp for worms. And the woodcock also has a peculiar rocking motion, if you've ever seen one. And it rocks back and forth in a peculiar way. And the theory is that as it does this, it induces pressure waves into the soil, not as vigorous as it does on a piece of spring, but enough of a pressure wave to cause worms to surface. All right, next illustration, please. Now we're going to get into root parasitism and the incredible mimicry that occurs. Now, there are 4 sets of eggs. In each of the 4 pairs, the bird, the egg on the right, was laid by a Eurasian cuckoo. The ones on the left, we have in order from the top, the garden warbler, great-winged warbler, Eurasian red star, and the white wagtail, all European birds. But you can see the incredible faithfulness with which the Eurasian cuckoo can duplicate the eggs of other birds. And it does this because if its eggs do not really match the eggs of the host species is likely to kick them out of the nest. So it has to be very faithful in reproducing eggs to like the host species. And you can see it's very versatile. It can do it for 4 different species very nicely. Now there's another bird that the Eurasian cuckoo parasitizes called the dunnock. And the dunnock is kind of dumb. And the cuckoo just lays ordinary eggs that don't even come close to the dunnock's eggs. And the dunnock doesn't know the difference and hatches them anyway. By the way, this phenomenon occurs in this country. What is the main root parasite around here? Cowbird, right? Does the cowbird do any of this stuff? No. It doesn't try to mimic the eggs. It doesn't do anything. It just lays the eggs in there, and the host birds raise them, and it makes out very well without going through all this. Why this disparity between the root parasitism of the cowbird and the Eurasian cuckoo? Well, they say that maybe the brown-headed cowbird, which is the one we have around here, has just started doing this. The birds that raises eggs in the nest haven't caught on to it yet. And that may be the case. That's the only explanation we have. Okay. By the way, another interesting thing occurs with the Eurasian cuckoo. There are some birds in England, one of them being a magpie, which definitely can figure out which eggs are its own and which eggs belong to the cuckoo. And it will throw those eggs out and get a chance. But the cuckoo doesn't give it a chance. If the magpie starts ejecting eggs, the cuckoo comes along and destroys its nest. So it has to lay a new clutch of it. So the magpie has to lay a new clutch. And it keeps destroying these nests until the magpie accepts the cuckoo's eggs. So it's kind of a mafia type operation. Okay, another case like this is interesting. In Central America, Mexico, you have a giant cowbird, which parasitizes a group of birds called oropendulas. And oropendulas are really huge orioles. They're black and orange, and they make hanging nests. And that should get the name oropendula, meaning golden swingers. Well, anyway, the oropendula can figure out which eggs are its own too, and it will eject the eggs of the giant cowbird if it gets a chance. Unless, this is not a mafia type operation here, it's a type of suppression of survival. In some cases in Central America, the blood-sucking flies in the nest are so serious that all the young birds in the nest will be killed. They're sucked dry with the blood-sucking flies. So it turns out that the chicks of the giant cowbird love to eat these flies. So if the flies are really bad, all the oropendulas will tolerate giant cowbirds in the nest, because the giant cowbirds, the chicks will eat the flies, and their own young will survive. Okay, now at the bottom we have an even more fantastic case of mimicry. Everybody see the bottom? Are 3 finches in Africa. Actually, it's there's 3 different species here, but there are actually 54 species in the family. And they have their mouths open, they're young chicks. And they have their mouth open like this when parents arrive back with food. Why do they open like this, and what's the meaningless colorful business? You will see, if I had a color slide to get more obvious, but the colors of the inside of the mouth and the arrangements of the spots constitute a password. The parent will not feed a chick that doesn't have the proper password, that is the proper arrangement of spots and colors. Now, in Africa, we don't have the Eurasian cuckoo, obviously, but we have 2 birds called Wydas, W-H-Y-D-A-H-S, and indigo birds. And they produce chicks, which have mouths that matches the birds with the parasites. So you have 54 species. We only show 3 here, but we have 54 species that are parasitized with 54 different passwords. And these root parasites in Africa have managed to evolve chicks that have the right passwords so that they get fed and be successful. A remarkable case of memory. Next picture. I like to show this because, well, you don't see ostriches in this position very often, but you see the arrows are pointing to calluses where the ostrich sits on the ground. It develops these, well, actually doesn't develop them, they're already there. These are places where the body of the ostrich normally hits the ground. And this is a case that kind of revives the markism, that is, if a characteristic is revived in life, it should not, according to the current evolutionary theory, be passed on to the progeny. But here is a feature in the case of the ostrich that is derived from life. It's produced during the life of the bird, and it has been passed on now to its progeny. And it looks like a case of Lamarckism, although there's the evolutionists are searching for other answers. Okay, next slide. The outline of the subject is covered in the first chapter on external appearance, and you'll see at the top the subject of avian asymmetries that we've already talked about. And then you get down to BBA 7, molting before hatching. Sounds like a strange thing to do, but there is one bird that actually molts the down it should have when it breaks out of the egg, and acquires a full set of flight feathers before it really hatches. And it's a whole group of birds, actually. These are the incubator birds, and brush turkeys of Australia and Southeast Asia and the guineas, like that. These birds are not hatched by the parents directly. The parents dig a hole in massive vegetation or in sand that is worn by underground heat, say they're near a volcano or something like that, and they let nature do the incubation. And when the chicks actually hatch, they don't pick their way out of the egg like chickens do. They don't even have an egg tube. They kick their way out. And in fact, they're all called megapods, meaning large feet. And as soon as they kick their way out of the egg, they tunnel their way up to the surface of the sand or the vegetation, and they immediately run off into the brush, and they can fly within an hour or 2. Wow. Completely, very, very highly precocious birds. BBA 11 is interesting. Unusual plumage color changes. For example, you can feed canaries a cake of pepper and turn them into orange, yellow to orange. But the most interesting plumage color change I found occurs among another African bird, family called the family of Turacos, T-U-R-A-C-O-S. These birds, believe it or not, are not color fast. When it rains, they lose their colors. And they don't get their colors back until they bolt next. Okay, BBA 26, way down the bottom, odoriferous birds. A lot of birds smell pretty badly, like petrels, for example. Even some of the nuthatches we have around here smell pretty bad. But the bird I want to talk about smells very sour. It's called the Pitui, P-I-T-O-H-U-I. And it's a bird of New Guinea. In fact, there are several in this group. And there are two interesting things about these birds, besides their smell. The first is they're the only poisonous birds. You pick them up and you get something off their feathers, you touch your eye or something, you're in great pain. The pituits, it's just been discovered recently that they are also poisonous. Some naturalists have been collecting them, and they were in a lot of trouble from handling them. And the other thing, besides poisonous nature, is the fact that they decay almost instantaneously when they're killed. In fact, the natives say, if you want to eat pituit, you have to have a pot of boiling water on the tree and let it fall into the boiling water. And there's a connection here I want to make. Here we have an animal that is poisonous and decays almost instantly. Probably maybe an hour or so. There's an animal that does the same thing. And that's the common garden shrew. This will decay almost immediately too, especially if it's in the sun or something. If you want to compare a specimen, a skin of a shrew, you have to dress it immediately. Otherwise, you have nothing but gunk left. But the connection is that the shrews are also poisonous, just like the pituit. Your little shrews running around your garden, you can give you a nice bite, and their saliva is poisonous. And you'll have a painful hand or something if you don't handle them carefully. Okay, now we get on to some more illustrations. Next one, please. Now we're getting back to brood parasitism. Okay, here again is Eurasian cuckoo. And the Eurasian cuckoo is the one doing the dirty work here. What it's doing is it's pushing the eggs of the host species out of the nest. But what it does, as soon as it's hatched, and it usually hatches earlier than the host species, it slithers under all objects in the nest. And believe it or not, it has a hollow in its back, especially designed to hold eggs. And that's what you see here. The egg of the host species is in the hollow in the back of the young cuckoo, and it's flipping it out. Now, if there's another bird in the nest already hatched, it'll do the same with the nestling of the host species, flip it out, until it is the only bird left there. Very interesting adaptation. Of course, this hollow disappears as it gets older. And the parent birds, by the way, just stand by and watch. They don't do anything. Next illustration, please. Now, the next illustration is again, we get back to the honey guys again in Africa. These honey guys are also brood parasites. The one on the left is the honey guy. It doesn't have an egg tube, but it has lethal bills, very sharp projecting bills. And as soon as it's hatched, the inverters are right in the nest. There's supposed to be blood running down there, and the bird of the other species doesn't show too well. And as soon as all the other birds are filled, the special beak point falls off. Okay, next picture, please. I think all these are, I'm just pulling out the things I think would be interesting for teams. Okay, top bird here in this case, this is a blue tit, which is an English bird. And back around 1921, some industrious, innovative blue tit found out that he could peck the open top of a milk bottle in front of, outside the door of somebody in town where they have outside milk delivery. And as you can see, that's exactly what it's doing here. It turns off the top and drinks it. It'll slip a little bit, fall in head first, and then housewife comes out and finds a brown bird in the milk bottle. In fact, this habit has become so prolific that when an milkman delivers bottles, he has to close the tab completely because the birds are following him, flying along after the truck delivering milk, so they get all these milk bottles. Well, this shows certainly that blue tits are very smart and innovative, and this kind of counteracts the dictum of the behaviorists who say that all animals outside humans are automatons. Obviously, these birds can think ahead and figure out solutions to problems. But the thing that's anomalous about this whole business of creating milk bottles is that it has spread with alarming speed. These birds, blue tits here, and all the other birds engaged in this practice, don't travel very far. They only travel a few miles from home territory.
Yet this practice has somehow been communicated to several dozen other species, and it's even jumped the channel into Europe, so continental Europe. Somehow, there's some form of communication that transmits this information on how to conquer the remote model very, very rapidly, much more rapidly than you expect, with birds that can only normally travel a few miles from their home territory. Now, one solution to this possible anomaly is the famous theory of Rupert Sheldrake that newly found behaviors are communicated by a mysterious force called morphic resonance. That is, once a chemical is synthesized in Europe, it becomes much easier to synthesize somewhere else. Somehow, new forms, new morphologies, and new behaviors can be transmitted sort of like thought waves from one place to another, just like gravity is transmitted from one mass to another. In fact, Sheldrake also explains ESP as a form of morphic resonance too. You get a thought in your mind, and your neurons connect up a certain way, and this formation of neurons is transmitted by morphic resonance to somebody else, and you have fun with it. Let's get to the bottom illustration now. In the bottom illustration we have, this happens to be an Atlantic puffin, a couple other species on the Pacific coast. The first interesting thing about the puffins is that it has a very colorful bill, which obviously you can't see here, but red and yellow and various colors. A beautiful bill, kind of like the feet of the finch that they have in the breeding season, and it's the only group of birds where the bill gets molded like feathers. When the breeding season is over, all those colorful plates on the bill fall off, and then it has a nondescript bill. But the interesting thing that I want to mention here is all the fish it has in its mouth. This is a diving bird. It dives underwater, swims around, picks up fish. But after it gets the first fish in its mouth, how can it catch the second one and still hold the first one? And even worse, how can it collect half a dozen here like this without losing some of them? But yet it does, and so do a lot of the other water birds. It's a minor mystery how they can collect all of these very wiggly, slippery fish and still come back to the nest without losing any of them. Next picture, please. In the next one, I'm going to show you an elaborate type of dance that some birds perform. These are swallowtail mannequins found in South America. They actually go through a dance like this. You can see the numbers, there's A, B, C, and so on. These are all males, and they form a collective display for the females. And they perform the motions indicated in the different sketches. And they do it so fast, and they're singing all the time, that it looks like a wheel of birds rotating around as they fly from one position to another. Very interesting type of collective dance. And only the alpha male gets to mate with the female. Some of these dances are extremely complex, as is the songs that sing. As are the songs that sing. Okay, next illustration. Next illustration shows one phenomenon I call pyramiding. That's the top of it. The birds in the top picture are native doves. They're small birds in the southwest. And these are small. They naturally get cold on the cold desert nights. So they actually come together in pyramids. This doesn't show the pyramid as well as it should. I might have to have this redrawn. But they actually pile on top of one another, forming a two-dimensional pyramid. As many as 15 sometimes form like this. On the bottom you have another bird called a wood swallow. It's not related to the swallows at all, it's actually related to the starlings. And these are in Australia. And these clump together sometimes as many as 50 or 100 at a time. Just like these, this is a three-dimensional cluster of birds. Not going to show too well here, but the later ones that come will hang on like bees do to a wild hive and form this big bunch of birds. Oh, while I'm talking about birds hanging like this to keep warm, this is something that fascinates me too. And there are actually birds that don't sit upright when they're resting at night. They actually hang like bats. They're called bat parrots, and actually there's several other species too. Mouse birds hang upside down in the sleeping and not just in bats. Now, when we're talking about groups of birds like this, I want to mention the Harrison's hawk. This is a bird of the Southwest. These birds hunt collectively, and you often see them on top of telephone poles, and they stand on top of one another. In fact, you can sometimes see 3 or 4 standing on top of one another, looking in different directions for prey. Another interesting type of bird collection is formed by the apostle birds. These are Australian birds, and they go around in groups of 12. Actually, some ornithologist threw water and cold water in this whole thing. He actually made a count, and it came up to 10.5 or something like that. But anyway, they go around almost in groups of 12. And in India, they have a bird called the jungle babbler, which was around groups of 7. So much for that. Okay, next slide, please. The next slide is one of a frog mouth. This is a bird of beginning, and indeed it has a mouth like a frog. It opens wide. It's a little bit like a nighthawk, or a whippoorwill. And it does eat frogs too. But here's a picture you want to draw in this case, because this illustration is going to show it completely. You can imagine a telephone pole or a dead tree. It sits at the top of the tree, it points its head up, closes its eyes, so it looks just like part of the tree, and then it opens its mouth wide. And from this open mouth comes a delicious smell to flies. And the flies fly right into its mouth, and it's a living fly trap. Okay, next illustration. The first illustration on this next page is a cassowary. This is, again, one of the rat snakes. It's about 6 feet tall. It lives in northern Australia and New Guinea, and you don't want to fool around with this bird. It's one of the leading causes of death among the natives of New England, because its toes are knife-like, and it just jumps at people and disembowels them. It's a big bird, believe me. It also has spikes on its wings, and its feathers have evolved into spikes too. So it's a very formidable and very irritable bird. And actually, there was a film clip in one of the nature programs which was showing one of these cassowaries chasing a family who was having a barbecue in their backyard in Australia. And in New Guinea, as I say, it's a leading cause of accidental death. Now, that's not why I'm showing the cassowary. Cassowary, no, keep the cassowary, please. Those things falling from the cassowary are fish. And here's how the cassowary goes fishing. That illustration, by the way, comes from a 1928 journal. So there's and I have that redrawn. The cassowary's feathers, like the feathers of all of the ratites, the kiwis and the ostriches and the emus, are degenerate. They're just spring-like. So when the cassowary wants a meal of fish, it wades into the water, spreads its wings out, and lets those long feathers dangle in the water so they look like grass. So the fish are always looking for a place to hide, so they come to hide in these things that look like strings of grass. So after about 15 minutes, the fish collect, the cassowary closes its wings, launches back to land, and lets the fish drop out and eats them. Interesting fishing technique. Okay, next, down the bottom, please. This is a crow. They call it anting. This is a type of behavior called anting, and it's anting with a light line. Birds generally ant by settling themselves into an anthill and letting ants run through their feathers. Nobody's exactly sure why, but they think it's to help rid of them.
Okay. The reason why people wonder whether that's a total answer is that anthills are kind of like catnip to the birds. When they settle on an anthill and these ants start running all over them, they go into ecstasy. It's a real strange behavior, type of behavior. And they also ant with other things too, such as toads, and they rub the toads into their feathers. And if they see a match like this is in one case it's crow, the crow knows how to light matches, and it lights the match and rubs the smoke and the active fumes and everything into his feathers. For the same reason, Emily, that birds settle on the Yankees. As I say, nobody has really sure why there's and. There's a tremendous amount of literature on something.
We need to get the lightest match from.
Well, this was staged by some experimentalists. They just leave meshes on the floor, see if the bird knows how to do with it, and it picks it up and makes it themselves.
I didn't learn how to do it.
I don't know. Smart birds. Smart people maybe. Oh, there's people that are smart, you know. I wish I had the illustration, but some jungle crows in Japan have been implicated in some problems with the Japanese train system. They love to pick up stones in their beaks and place them on trails. They have to shut down the lines until they can throw all the stones away. Crows will also put nuts in front of automobiles. Nuts that they can't crack. So when cars run over them, they crack them, and they come. All right, next illustration.
Here's a map of Australia and New Zealand. The shaded areas in the bottom are the wintering ranges of a bird called the shining bronze cuckoo. Yet again, it's a parasitic bird, so that the young birds never see their parents, unless by accident. And they migrate long distances. They migrate from southern Australia and New Zealand all the way up into the Solomons and Bismarck archipelago, several thousand kilometers. And the question is, how do they do this? They do it by instinct. But when you are setting out as a young bronze cuckoo and you want to migrate several thousand kilometers, you have to know a lot of things. You have to know to fatten up beforehand. You have to know when to leave. You have to know which direction to start out in. You have to have in your possession an internal clock so that you can navigate by the position of the sun and the stars. You have to have all this information, so you have to have an information problem here. How does this all information all transmitted from the parent to the young bird? It's obviously done through the genes, but nobody's figured out how all these bytes, which must number in the millions, are transmitted. But this isn't the whole story here. There's another bird in New Zealand called the long-tailed cuckoo, which migrates without parents again. It sets out on its own. It's never been there before. It flies all the way up past the Bismarck archipelago, across the equator to Micronesia, several thousand more kilometers, and the shining bronze cuckoo. Very interesting problem in information transfer by genetic beings. Okay, we have the lights, and we'll take any questions. All right. Any questions? Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the newly hatched kiwi.
I can't hear you.
I'd like to ask you about the newly hatched kiwi when it comes out. Is it also large?
Yes.
What's the size of the adult?
You subscribe to the theory that birds evolved from dinosaurs. You know that breathing apparatus is completely different from intermediate.
Well, as a 49, I don't subscribe to anything. That's why you're curious, you know.
Theory that breaks down, you look at their breathing apparatus. You understand birds have a one-pass through breathing system, and dinosaurs have a lung system.
In fact, there's an article in a recent issue of Science, about the structure of the hands. They're different from dinosaurs too.
That last one you had about cuckoo migration, you also have to account for the fact that over long periods of time, that geography changes.
That's right. Any questions? Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any information about the story that's been going around about hummingbirds that migrate with the geese? Have you heard that one? A friend of mine picked it up on the internet, and there seems to be some
There's an old wise
migration.
tale about birds being carried across the Mediterranean in the back of storks, for example, but nobody's ever observed it as far as I know.
Right.
Yeah. Incidentally, there are almost 400 species of hummingbirds in South America. It's just amazing. That's another story, I think.
But okay, when you talked about the crows putting the nuts for the cars and whatever, it made me think about the really incredible experiments you made on TV. Dr. Irene Pepperberg, which is animal psychologist, and she taught a parent apparently it's not a trick or anything. They would show a parrot, say, a green object, and he'd ask, what color? And he'd go, green, and so forth. And I know it sounds incredible. It seems to be authentic. I don't wonder if you've ever heard of that, or it's just incredible. You know, it's hard to believe it. It doesn't seem to be phony or anything like that.
Nothing about it.
That was an entire show on parrots, if you need to dig it up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I remember doing it.
There was another entire show, but I can't give you a reference on the Thunderbird. And it was done in the last 2 weeks that I saw it, but I don't know where it went.
Well, I'll be very interested in that.
I have the tape with me. I'll show it to you later.
Great.
Remember, everything I've said here is based on what I see in the scientific journals, and Thunderbirds don't make it. All of us, I try to store some brand. Yeah, for a long time they thought the pigeons did that. They've done a lot of experiments with pigeons, put magnets on their back and everything. All the evidence to date is they probably don't use the geomagnetic field for long-range navigation. But you realize what you have to migrate long distances magnetically, you have to have a map of the geomagnetic field in your mind. Okay, so that's another problem of transmitting instincts, a large amount of information from the parent to the young. The other? Yep.
Have you heard anything about a sacred blind bird in Ecuador that lives in tunnels, underground tunnels?
You don't know the name of the bird?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
There are a lot of birds who live in tunnels.
But it's blind. It's born blind and it survives blind in
I
these
don't know
tunnels.
about that. And if you find out anything, I'm sure I can know more. Before I finish this book. Okay. Yeah, my address is around somewhere. Oh, there's another one. Yep.
What about birds and counting? There are various stories about birds being able to count 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yes.
Maximum number, it might be very small. Are you going to include anything on that?
Yes, in my book there will be, especially experiments with jackdaws. Jackdaws are big counters.
You mentioned the birds that open milk bottles in England. I believe I read that it was a theory that they started to do that because during right after a very severe winter, when people started to put a lot of food out for the birds, and they became accustomed to having not to hunt for their own food. And that was what this was a theory that's why they
I don't know about the actual origin. I just worry about the spread how that was.
I was watching a learning channel program the other day. It was about some parrots and various other pet birds, and we had this one on there that was able to count colors of objects and which object was larger and which one was smaller and what color it was.
Yeah. You know, the Japanese.
What did he say?
The Japanese have trained pigeons again to tell different artists apart by showing their paintings. They can show a painting to an artist and indicate which artist painted that. They've only gone for 2 artists now, but they can discriminate between 2 artists by the style.
Cornell University has been doing a study of the birds who swarm together like this and keep in motion. Have you gotten into that, the study of that?
A lot of questions here, and very few answers. Most often they attribute it to the Corliss line effect, where somebody's watching the person next to them, and very fast reactions. They can see the wave coming toward them, and they can act accordingly. This is, of course, what Corliss lines do. Corliss lines have an advantage, of course, because they know from music what's coming. A lot of times the birds don't, and you have to kind of keep extra sharp behind them.
Because I'm sorry.
See the wave developing. Yeah.
There have been massive bird kills, and they figure that something happened. It's almost like fighter pilots or pilots who do air shows, is that they're watching the wingman, so to speak. And something happens to that lead bird, and I don't know if you've gotten into any in-depth study on that.
Yeah, that's going to be in the book.
Thanks, Bill. For those of you who still have questions, and there are clearly a lot of them, Bill will be up with his wife in the book room after this afternoon's closing presentation. We can field some questions with him then. Ain't nature marvelous? Yeah. Looks like phenomena really does continue to abound, and it's not something isolated to a human psychological need for power and control. About the bird that loses its color after a rainstorm, I suggest that it be called the stealth bird, or B2.
Walmart food.
Here's a news item we got from the paper this past June. Seems the cops in Collinsville, Illinois were pursuing an alleged murder suspect. Suspect ran into the woods, into a large field actually, in his effort to hide from the authorities. Where to find him in this big field of grain? Well, an alert county sheriff noticed that a few cows were congregating in a certain area rather than idly grazing at random.
Into the current day of Brahma. So, say if we had a Vedic archaeologist, what would such a person, what would such an archaeologist expect to find? Well, they'd expect to find signs of life on this planet going back roughly 2 billion years, because that would be the beginning of the current day of Brahma. And it's an interesting coincidence, I find it an interesting coincidence, that according to just even your standard paleontology, the first signs of life on Earth do go back to roughly that period of time, 2 to 3 billion years, when you have the first fossils of the blue-green algae occurring in the fossil record. Of course, our Vedic archaeologists would expect to find not only evidence of very simple creatures like the blue-green algae, but also evidence for more advanced life forms, perhaps even humans, going back perhaps that far, 2 billion years. Of course, that's quite a revolutionary concept for your standard orthodox archaeologist and anthropologist. Next slide. One thing we have to consider when we're looking at the geological record is that it's very incomplete. Geologists will tell us that of all the sedimentary layers that have ever been deposited on the Earth, only about 5 to 10% remain. All the rest have been destroyed by erosion and other geological processes. And of that percentage, that tiny percentage that remains, actually only a tiny fraction of a percentage of that has ever been looked at by geologists, paleontologists, archaeologists, and others. And then each school of researchers has their own particular point of view through which the evidence is filtered. So really what you wind up with is a very fragmentary record. Nevertheless, say our Vedic archaeologist would expect to find a very sparse but nevertheless real record of an anatomically modern human presence on this planet going back roughly 2 billion years. This Vedic archaeologist might also predict that since most of this evidence would be encountered by archaeologists and other scientists who have an entirely different set of assumptions about the nature and origin of life on this planet, that they might tend to edit that record to fit their own evolutionary preconceptions. Next slide. I don't expect you to be able to read all the fine print here, but basically on the left hand you have the conventional scenario of human origins, where you have life beginning on this planet about 2 billion years ago, the very first apes and monkeys coming into existence about 40 to 50 million years ago, the first hominids, or upright walking human ancestors, about 4 to 5 million years ago, and anatomically modern humans like ourselves coming into existence about 100,000 or 200,000 years ago, and the first signs of civilization, per se, coming at about 10,000.
Now, generally we're told that everything that scientists have discovered over the past 150 years more or less conforms to this basic outline of anatomically modern humans coming into existence rather late in the geological record. But in the 8 years of research that I did with Richard Thompson, we found that over the past 150 years, archaeologists and anthropologists have discovered abundant evidence showing that human beings like ourselves have been present throughout this entire period of time. And I mentioned that the research took me 8 years, and I didn't think it was going to take 8 years. I thought it might take 8 weeks. Because I was aware of some anomalies. And I thought, well, I'll collect a few more, I'll look through the literature, I'll collect a few more, and we'll come out with a little book, maybe 100 pages long, and we'll present this evidence to the world. But I found, as I started looking into it, an incredible body of scientifically reported evidence for extreme human activity. So much so that it took about 8 years to gather it from scientific journals and publications and many different languages from around the world. And this evening, I just want to share with you a representative sample of the kinds of evidence that we encountered and that are reported in the 900 pages of Forbidden Archaeology. Next. Of course, why don't we hear so much about this evidence? It's because of what I would call a process of knowledge filtration. The little blue box is the knowledge filter, and the reports of evidence that more or less conform to orthodox scientific ideas, they tend to pass very easily through this filter. If they deviate perhaps slightly from the accepted ideas, they may pass through with some difficulty, but if they radically contradict the accepted ideas, they tend to be rejected in terms of either being forgotten, set aside, ignored, or in some cases actively suppressed. Next. Now one case that I like very much is the case of the California gold mine discoveries. Of course, during the California gold rush days, miners were going to California, and initially they were panning for gold in the rivers, but then they started digging tunnels into the sides of mountains. Next. For example, at Table Mountain in the central Sierra Nevada mountains, the miners were digging tunnels, sometimes thousands of feet through solid rock to get to the gold-bearing deposits. And inside these tunnels, they were finding anatomically modern human skeletons. They were finding spear points. They were finding hundreds of stone tools at many, many different locations, not just in one place. Next. And this is an example of one of the many hundreds of stone tools that were found there. This is stone, mortar, and pestle. Next. The unusual thing about these discoveries is they date to the early Eocene. They would be about 50 million years old. So our Vedic archaeologist wouldn't be surprised by that, because he or she would be, well, expected to find evidence going back even further. Your Orthodox archaeologist would, this couldn't even be considered. This is totally beyond the bounds of what could even be wildly dreamed about as possible. Next. This body of evidence was reported to the scientific world by Dr. J.D. Whitten, who was the state geologist of California at the time. He reported it in a book called The Auriferous Gravels of the Sierra Nevadas. Auriferous means gold-bearing. The book was published by Harvard University in 1880. Now, why don't we hear so much about these discoveries today? Next slide. It's largely due to the influence of this gentleman, Dr. William B. Holmes, who was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution right here in Washington, D.C. And the Smithsonian Institution has always been a very
influential scientific research organization in the United States. In the 19th century, its influence was probably much greater than it is today. So using his position of power and influence, Dr. Holmes said, well, if this Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution as we understand it today, then he would have hesitated to announce his conclusions despite the imposing array of testimony with which he was confronted. In other words, the evidence, even an imposing array of such evidence, if it goes against an orthodox accepted scientific idea, then it has to be set aside. And essentially that's what happened next. And this is another one of the many stone tools that were found in those gold mines. Now these artifacts are still kept today in the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Natural History at the University of California in Berkeley. And in 1996, I had the fortune to work with a television producer, Bill Cote, of BC Video, to produce a television program which was aired on NBC called Mysterious Origins of Man. And while they were filming that, I advised them to go to the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Natural History at the University of California at Berkeley and try to get permission to film these particular artifacts, which are stored there. They're not displayed to the public. And the museum officials reacted in very interesting ways. The first thing they said to the producers was, well, you're working on a television program. You obviously have a very tight deadline. We wouldn't possibly have time to bring these artifacts out for you to film. But the producers told them, no, we have 3 or 4 months. We have plenty of time, so please, bring them out. At that point, the museum officials told them, well, we have another problem. We have a staff shortage. We have a very tight budget. We would have to pay our workers overtime to have them bring these artifacts out from storage, so please excuse us. At that point, the producers came back with an offer to pay all of the overtime expenses, any other expenses that would be involved, and then finally, the museum curator just said, no, we're not going to let you film these artifacts. And I suspect the reason is because they thought that the material would probably be used in a way that wasn't in line with their objectives.
Now, it's also very interesting what happened when that television program was aired, because there was unprecedented outrage from the scientific community in the United States and also around the world. It was the first time in history that a major American television network had broadcast a program that really questioned the standard Darwinian concept of human origins. And it was sort of like Pearl Harbor Day for the scientists. They had not imagined that any such thing could be possible. If you look in, there's an issue of the journal Science, which is published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. They said nothing. They had seen nothing in all the time that they had been watching the scientific community. They'd seen no outpouring of outrage that matched what happened when this particular television show was aired in February of 1996. They have an organization called the National Center for Science Education. And the sole purpose of that organization is to keep the standard orthodox ideas about the evolution of life on this planet intact in the nation's high schools in particular. And the president of that organization said in this particular issue of Science that the telephones in his offices were ringing off the hook because biology teachers from all over the United States were calling because their students were asking them questions they couldn't answer after they'd seen this television program. Now, if you can just imagine the level of outrage that was there after the program aired the first time, it increased several orders of magnitude when the scientific community discovered that NBC was going to rebroadcast the program in June. Now, at that point, if any of you were on the internet, say monitoring the groups like Sci-Archaeology, Sci-Anthropology, Talk Origins, and many of the other scientific discussion groups, at that point you would have seen literally thousands of messages being exchanged. And of course, many of them were about forbidden archaeology. Actually, there was one very astute scientist, when he heard the initial advertisements for this television program, Mysterious Origins of Man, talking about evidence for extreme human antiquity going back millions and millions of years, he put a message on the internet before the show was broadcast saying, I predict that this television program was sponsored by this nasty book, Forbidden Archaeology. You know, it's not coming from the Christian creationists. It's so after the program came out, he was very proud to say he was correct. But what happened when the scientific community learned that this program was going to be broadcast a second time is they began a very intense letter writing campaign to attempt to force General Electric, which is the company that owns NBC, to force NBC not to show the program again. They also began a very well-organized attempt to pressure the sponsors to withdraw their sponsorship of the program. And it was very interesting how NBC reacted. I think, taking the example of Velikovsky, back in the 1950s, I think if this sort of thing had happened 10 or 15 years ago, this kind of campaign would have succeeded in keeping the program off the air. However, there seems to be some kind of change going on in the world because NBC responded by simply using, well, their publicity for the second showing of the program was to tell the American people, watch the television program that the scientists don't want you to see. So now, then, if the level of outrage was already at a peak, it became very shrill. After that, there was shrieking. And what? Now this is, you might find this pretty amazing, but Dr. Allison R. Palmer, who is the head of the Institute for Cambrian Studies, actually attempted to get the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, to punish NBC for having broadcast this film. And it wasn't an isolated effort on his part. It was it was a very public effort, and he broadcast his message all over the internet to all of the scientific discussion groups. And he had the support of many people within the scientific community. So here's what he asked the Federal Communications Commission to do: to publicly censure NBC for having broadcast Mysterious Origins of Man. He wanted the FCC to direct NBC to broadcast numerous public apologies and retractions for having aired the program. And plus he wanted NBC